You know me, Impun Lacistis, brothers. It's time to discuss the true masters of the shadows in Warhammer 40K, the Raven Guard. I know we've saved them for last, but it's actually one of my favorite factions. The reason it took so long is I wanted to make sure I got a lot of good lore background, because a lot of the Raven Guard don't have good, solid books. You have the Omnibus and a few other short stories. A lot of them aren't in audiobook, so I did have to read those as well. So this list isn't going to be a culmination of just a single book, but will be a culmination of several short stories so that we can get a good picture of who the Raven Guard are. Oftentimes, when the Raven Guard are depicted anywhere outside of the Horus Heresy, you don't actually see them in full Legion form. A lot of times you're seeing them in kill teams and squads that are active in a battlefield or a conflict where they're being used as kind of the special forces and recon of a lot of other Space Marine legions. In a lot of cases, the other legions don't even know they're there. So it's a lot of fun to see what they're like in 40K and really build a list around that. So let's dive into it, talk about the background material, and we'll go from there. Now, if you saw my last video last week, there's a big part of the Raven Guard play that I think a lot of 40K fans are either missing or ignoring. And because of that, it's really, really cool to see how involved under the table they are. They are really the shadows of the Imperium that strike without mercy and stop wars before they even start, in a lot of cases. And this is reflected really well in a quote from the book that I really enjoyed from the Omnibus. It says, "From the darkness we strike, fast and lethal." It really shows what they're about. Their whole goal is to remove enemy leaders or threats to the Imperium and circumvent a lot of the potential problems that could come. While this is very noble and different for the Raven Guard compared to a lot of the other Space Marine legions, most of the other Space Marine legions and chapters don't take too well to it because they're not fighting in the more chivalric sense. They're not actively going onto a battlefield and fighting against a foe and standing in battle lines and things like that. While this is the case, the Raven Guard just doesn't care. They don't care what other Space Marines think. They don't really care what other Space Marine legions or chapters do. They just are there to protect the Imperium by any means necessary. And their actions go a long way to protecting large swaths of the galaxy. Because of this, I have started to suspect that there may be more to their actions. Throughout this book, you see Kayvon Shrike communing with different psychers and astropaths and receiving messages from somewhere. It never really says where he's receiving the messages from or what they say in most cases, but a lot of times he will get these messages and then he'll send out a kill team to go take out somebody before they become a problem. Or he'll send out a kill team to go retrieve something for him. Or he'll send out another kill team to go clean up a mess that's just starting or interdict in a mess that hasn't technically started yet. And it's really fascinating to see how quickly and easily the Raven Guard is able to counter chaos and chaos's interdiction. They still lose. They still lose a lot of guys, and sometimes they don't get there fast enough. But that level of precognition is something that is nearly impossible. Throughout 30K, only two Primarchs really have that ability, and neither of them knew how to use it properly. And Corax wasn't really one of them. He had other abilities that were gifted to him, but it's really, really cool to see and led to my theory. I'll pop up the Primarch theory video right here. It was a lot of fun and gave me an opportunity to really tinfoil hat my way into 40K. It's a really interesting theory that has kind of changed the way that I view 40K. So make sure you go check that out. But that's not talking about the Raven Guard. As you can tell, I really love them. I really love them in the stories and on the tabletop. Our custom chapter that we're working on is a Raven Guard successor. So if you haven't, go check out the posts and see some of the cool stuff we've come up with. Feel free to comment and vote on those. I'm just about to start painting them, maybe. I have a few other painting projects to do, as well as a bunch of other book stuff that I have to do before I can get there. But as soon as I start painting them, I will let you guys know and post some pictures and everything so you can see how it's going, because it was a lot of fun to create that chapter with you guys. So let's dive into the army list and talk about what a lore accurate Raven Guards list would look like if they actually went to the battlefield as a full unit. So to build this list up, I had to compile a bunch of things, pull a bunch of different units from the short stories, and bring them to the tabletop to really get a good picture. I did also have to use the book Corax from the Horus Heresy, because that's one of the few places where you actually see full company-sized units of Raven Guard on the table or on the battlefield. And from what we see throughout the 40K books and stories, their fighting style hasn't changed nearly at all. They're one of the few chapters that has remained very loyal to who they were the entire time. They are very much the almost vigilante style fighters. They always look out for the little guy, and they have a very, very deep-seated hatred of authority and are very unwilling to trust people, especially the Inquisition. They do not like the Inquisition at all. And given the Raven Guard's history on deliverance, that's not that surprising. So it was a lot of compilation to even get here. But let's talk about the list and go from there. So leading this unit was a pretty obvious choice. He's either a main character or is a kind of commanding side character in all of the stories we read. That's Kayvon Shrike. He's the only Raven Guard character that exists on the tabletop, but he's also a main character throughout all of this story as well. So easy choice there. I also included an apothecary. The apothecaries are a big part of the Raven Guard. They're very, very protective of their gene seed, as well as actually treating the wounded, which is something that's not entirely true about a lot of the Space Marine chapters. On top of that, I do have a captain with jump pack, as well as a chaplain with jump pack. So if you're counting, that's 3 separate jump pack commanders. Jump packs are a big part of the Raven Guard, how they move quickly and get places. And that's an easy way to approach this on the tabletop as well. You'll be doing a lot of standoff and maneuver type fighting to get your units quickly to objectives and then hold them until too much force comes, and then you'll have to redirect certain units to take care of that as well. On top of that, we do have a librarian in Phobos armor. Librarians are also a big staple of the Raven Guard, even though as far as the librarians is concerned, they tend to be a little bit more slept on because they don't do big, showy, flashy things. The Raven Guard librarians are masters of shadows and mental interrogation tricks. They're very, very good at probing minds and pulling information from unwilling prisoners to really build their ability as spy masters and saboteurs. They're also extremely skilled at maneuvering and moving shadows, and in a lot of cases, most of the Raven Guard does have some touch of the Psyker because of their ability for shadow mastery. It's not a universal trait. There are several sections that aren't as good or can't do it at all, but a much larger part of the Raven Guard is able to do it. It's quite impressive. Next, we do need an Assault Intercessor squad, either to be paired with the apothecary or the librarian. I would probably tend to stick them with the apothecary, because I would stick one of the Blade Yard veteran squads with my librarian. Now, you also have 3 squads of Assault Intercessors with jump packs, and two Blade Guard squadrons, which we kind of already mentioned. On top of that, we do have Devastator squad. This is brought up. The Devastator squad is going to be there mostly for sabotage and high explosive destruction. They're a key part of the Raven Guard as well, and will play a pretty decent part in the anti-tank squads. You're also going to have 2 Eliminator squads. Snipers are a major part of the Raven Guard to really give you some precision, some assassination. And you're also going to have a Reaver squad. The Reaver squad is either going to be on the back lines or will be one of the rapid moving units that you just kind of expect to take a hit and you kind of play chicken with some of the enemy. You also have a scout squad that kind of does the same thing as a Reaver squad as well. Now, to give you some little bit more anti-tank punch, you do have a Redemptor Dreadnought that is going to be your kind of main force against larger units. And you also have 2 Impulsors to help move, especially your Blade Guard squads, around the board quickly and get you the control you need where you need it. And finally, you're going to need a lot of Raven Guard sprues. You don't have to do it, but the Raven is really hard to paint. And I found some of the actual decals that come in the boxes you either don't have enough or they're just not going to be as good a quality. So be careful with those, but yeah, I would recommend the sprues as well. So next, let's talk about how much this was going to cost a field and what type of changes we'd suggest for the fluffy list. So now that we know what type of list we're building, let's talk about how much this is going to cost. And as a reminder, as always, for this calculation, I did it piecemeal, so every single unit has to be bought separately. There are several ways that you can get this for a lot cheaper, so I would recommend going those routes with combo boxes and things like that. But I did this just so the numbers would stay roughly true for a lot longer. Combo boxes come and go very quickly and sell out very quickly, so I didn't want this video to not be true 6 months from now. So first off, we do the full retail cost. The full retail cost is if you buy it straight from Warhammer.com. I do not recommend going this route unless you absolutely have to. There are certain characters that are online only, and you can only be bought from Warhammer.com. But if you don't have to do it, don't do it. You're going to spend considerably more than going to your LGS or a couple of websites we'll talk about here in a minute. So the full retail cost of this Raven Guard army is $1,470.50. Not the absolute worst, but also not the best. Next, we do have the value total. The value total is using things like Wargame Portal and Amazon.com. I did not include LGS prices because those do vary wildly depending on which LGS, where you're at, what their relationship is with Games Workshop, and so on. But I absolutely do recommend checking your LGS first. In my opinion, that should be the first place you check the price on it, and then I would check Wargame Portal and Amazon. Those are my 3 options for getting units to build. You can also do the secondhand market, but those will be far less consistent than your LGS, Wargame Portal, and Amazon. So your value total, if you go through the Wargame Portal or Amazon route, is $1,251.60. So that saves you about $220, which is great. That's not a small chunk of change. So absolutely recommend going that way. Now, some players want to take it to the next level, and you can definitely do that. The Horus Heresy has some really, really cool models that let you flesh out your units and see exactly where they're going so that you can create an even more Raven Guard feeling unit. When you do this, you'll be bringing in some technically firstborn Marines and get a different feel to your army that looks and feels very uniquely Raven Guard. In order to do that, in my opinion, there's 2 different units as well as your accessory sprues that I change out. They're pretty easy swaps, but because they're Horus Heresy and a lot of times they're fine cast instead of plastic, they will be a little bit more expensive. So the first one I'm going to change out is the Assault Intercessors with jump packs. The Horus Heresy has a Dark Fury squad. They're epic looking, and they are very, very Raven Guard look. To me, they're the obvious choice there. It does jump the price from $51 at value cost to $89. On top of that, I would also consider changing out the Scout Squad for a Recon Squad. This isn't a have-to thing. It's entirely up to you. The Recon Squad does have a little bit stealthier look to them, but the Scout Squad will do its job as well. And the price difference on this is pretty staggering. The recon squad is going to be $144 instead of the $68 of the value cost scouts. So that's going to be your call, but I do recommend it for sure. Finally, the Raven Guard sprues, you can change that out for the Heads and Pauldrons sprues from Horus Heresy, and it does make a big difference. There's a lot more style and flair to the Horus Heresy ones, and that jumps the price from $30 for the 40K ones to $50 for the Horus Heresy ones. So with those changes, that takes the full fluffy total to $1,613.10. So that is a pretty steep jump. You're seeing a lot of that specifically from the scouts, although the sheer amount of assault intercessors with jump packs you have may cause that to jump as well. Also, you don't have to do all 3 assault intercessors with jump packs as the Dark Furies. I'd maybe suggest doing 1 or 2. I'd probably do 2 personally and put both of them with Kayvon Shrike and the Captain so that you really get that very Raven Guard flair. And then I'd use just regular assault intercessors to pair with the Chaplain. But that's entirely your call on how you want to do it. There's a lot of really cool things you can do, so I definitely suggest doing that as well. Now that you've seen how much it's going to cost to actually build the army, let's talk about how you're going to get them painted and tabletop ready, because honestly, they're an interesting one. The Raven Guard tend to be pretty much all black. There's not a lot of accents to their armor. They do use white accents as well as white for the symbols on their chests and sometimes on their arms, but they're Shadow Masters. They prefer to be in the dark. They prefer to be able to disappear into shadow even though they're a Space Marine. So having black armor is extremely important to them. Sometimes they'll do the red stripe across their head to symbolize their rank as a sergeant, but other than that, there's not a lot of color. Sometimes they'll surround one pauldron in the Codex style to symbolize their actual company markings, but it's pretty rare. They don't tend to display a lot of color or accents. So unfortunately, painting these is going to come down to a lot of detail painting so that you can see the accents and you can see the lines. It's actually hard to paint black and make it actually pop. There's a lot of shadow points that just kind of disappear. So you'll be doing a lot of accenting with silvers and things like that. You'll be doing some metal work, and one of the tricks I learned was to use a sponge lightly dabbed and almost dried, and then just lightly tapping it on the armor to show weathering and chipping. This gives it a lot more strength and accents, especially along the edges of the armor. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with them. I definitely recommend going on YouTube and looking at one of the professional painters. There's a lot of really good how to paint Raven Guard videos that will bring it out. One of the big things I always recommend is doing red eyes on the helmets, because red on black just pops and looks spectacular. So I'd always recommend that. You do also have white helmets sometimes with the Raven Guard. Treat it accordingly and see what looks best. I definitely recommend making some test units and playing with them to see what exactly fits. But that's what I'd recommend for painting. So let's talk about how you're going to play them on the tabletop with tactically, and we'll go from there. Okay, so tactically, the Raven Guard are going to be very different from your normal Space Marines. Normally, Space Marines are very heavy plotting approach and detect and wipe out certain sections, while strategically controlling an entire section of the board. Raven Guard aren't going to be that way. You're going to have a lot of lighter, faster units, so you're going to be doing a lot of quick advances, steal objectives, and then maneuver to force people into firing lanes. You're going to use your eliminators to do that as well, controlling any open firing lanes and forcing their units into those firing lanes. To do this, I'm going to use Vanguard Spearhead as my detachment, and I'm going to make heavy use of the Shadow Master's ability. It's going to give me a lot of cover and stealth that I wouldn't have otherwise. So I definitely recommend going that route. I'm hoping eventually we get some more detachments that you can use for the Raven Guard, but I kind of doubt it. You don't see a lot of the Raven Guard on the tabletop because it's kind of hard to represent the shadows properly and their shadow walking abilities. So I suspect this is probably going to best we get at least in 10th edition. So those are my recommendations on how to play and what it's like. Let me know in the comments below if there's any other lore accurate videos you'd like me to do. We still have a lot of room to go. And stay tuned next week. We're going to do one of the projects I've been working on for quite a while in the Fiction to 40K series. I'm super excited about it, and I've kind of hinted at it in several other videos up to this point. So make sure you join us next week, and I'll see you guys later.